All right, now let's talk about the U.S.-Russian relationship. This is a very rocky situation. There is a lot to talk about here. We'll start with Russia and then the U.S. confirming that the U.S. had flown nuclear bombers within 12.4 miles of Russia's borders during exercise Global Thunder. And 10 strategic bombers practice employing nuclear weapons against Russia. And this is obviously something that would make Russia feel really uncomfortable if it happened in the US and was reported by the mainstream media. I'm sure many Americans would be upset about it. And so this is obviously a very provocative thing that the United States is doing, and at a time where the Biden administration first of all is crying constantly about the climate change stuff. You would think that cutting out these unnecessary training flights right up to Russia's borders with these very costly high carbon planes like the strategic bombers and everything, you want to like walk away and cut those things down as much as possible. And one advantage would be is you could go to Russia and both sides could agree to cut down on flights or something like that. But obviously the opposite is happening here, and the US is carrying out these provocative exercises. Germany has formed a new government. I don't think the new leader is officially in place yet. His name is Olaf Scholz, and he will replace Angela Merkel, who has been in that position for well over a decade now as Germany's chancellor. So I guess it doesn't seem like much is changing. Germany's going to keep hosting U.S. nukes. It doesn't look like that's going to move or change at all in this situation, which with the U.S. flying nuclear bomber runs up to Russia's borders, may make Germany a target for Russia in some ways. The U.S. is also starting off the Winter Shield 21 War Games. It's going to run the last couple of weeks of November into December. Bunch of armored military units coming in from different NATO countries to train on different maneuvers and stuff like that. Of course, this is a country that borders Russia. Again, very provocative drills and everything that the U.S. is carrying out here. Ukraine has deployed special operations forces to its border with Belarus to carry out military exercises there. Of course, Belarus is Russia's probably strongest ally, I guess. It's not a Russian proxy state, but it is a state that has a mutual defense agreement with Russia. It's going to, if Belarus is attacked, I think largely Russia would probably come defend it. And so this is like a NATO versus Russia situation with Ukraine, which isn't technically a NATO member, but with the statements we're hearing from the head of NATO and Joe Biden, which we'll get to in a minute, and then Belarus, that this is increasing tensions between the U.S. and Russia, and this comes after Ukraine has deployed already 8,500 troops to its border with Belarus over fears that migrants could enter through that border. Ukraine also carried out military drills along the region of Ukraine that is in rebellion to the government. So put an extra 8,500 troops in the Donetsk region. And, this, while the Ukrainians will say, oh, we're just carrying out the military drills in case it's a defensive kind of thing. Maybe it's a show of force. Of course, it seems to also to be a military buildup in an area where there's a separatist that are, people will say Russian bat, and I don't think it's exactly like, they're puppets of the Russian government or anything, but certainly the rebellion in the Donbass region is heavily supported by Russia, and, Russia does allow that rebellion to continue in some ways. Now, I'm sure they would, continue to fight and just wouldn't immediately subject themselves if they weren't backed by Russia. But at the same time, when the U.S. gives, Ukraine more military power and stuff like that, Russia has matched on the other side of the border as well to prevent and kind of keep the lines that are in Ukraine between the East and the West where they are. We have Ukraine asking the NATO for a constant warship presence in the Black Sea. And the U.S. met this call by sending the USS Arleigh Burke into the Black Sea. This is a U.S. guided missile destroyer, and it joins two other destroyers which are already in the Black Sea. So this is... or actually, I guess Dave writes here that the other two, the USS Porter and the USS Mount Whitney, had just completed their operations in the Black Sea. So this is keeping up with the, U.S. constant presence of having some kind of warship in the Black Sea, which largely is not exactly a Russian lake, but kind of a Russian lake. Lots of Russian borders on the Black Sea, no U.S. borders on the Black Sea. We had the U.S. delivering 2 patrol boats to the Ukraine. They are Island-class patrol boats and former U.S. Coast Guard ships. They've been, decommissioned and refurbished. The U.S. is going to give them 5 in total, and I think these are the delivery of the first 2. Now, with everything going on, the U.S. is not warning that, we're trying to hold back our allies in Ukraine and de-escalate the situation. No, the U.S. warns of the Russian military activity near Ukraine's border and also in Crimea. So, most of the listeners of the show know that when you look at a map of Ukraine, the eastern region, the Donbass region, is the region in rebellion, but also the Crimean Peninsula, South Ukraine, was, when the USSR broke apart, a part of Ukraine. But then the U.S. coup in Ukraine in 2014 and the threats to join NATO led Russia to annexing the Crimean Peninsula, which was backed by a referendum of the people in Crimea. Like 80+% of the people were all for Russia annexing Crimea. Russia has dumped a lot of infrastructure money into Crimea since seizing it. And so, that's kind of the situation where the Crimean Peninsula is once again a part of Russia, and the eastern region isn't an area of Russia, or isn't an area of Ukraine that Russia really has an interest in annexing or expanding to, because it would be like an economic liability. And also there's probably some consideration in Moscow that this is the area of Ukraine that is largely ethnically Russian, has a lot of historical ties towards Russia, and is pro-Russia. They would rather, sign some kind of a deal with Russia than they would with NATO or the EU or something like this if they were given either or option, as the EU had done to Ukraine in the past. So Russia, seeing that situation, I think, would rather this area remain a part of Ukraine, because if the country's going to have elections, then, this is a lot of votes who are going to vote for a candidate that is going to be more friendly towards Russia than, people in Kiev in the west of Ukraine, who are more likely to vote for a candidate who's going to be hostile towards Russia and pro joining NATO. So Ukraine is claiming, I think they have like 92,000 troops in the region. I don't think this is an occupation or invasion force or anything like that. My sense is that Russia is probably upset with the U.S. military exercises on its borders, and then with the Ukrainian military buildup and the threats from like Poland and everything towards Belarus, has led that Russia to take these military actions as kind of counter maneuvers to what everybody else is doing. Not that it's a little bit more cyclical. It's not just that the Russians are only responding. They build up a little bit, the other side build up a little bit, and stuff like that. But ultimately, it is the U.S. that could start to walk this thing back, but has continued to push it forward. We had the head of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, warning Russia that if Russia uses force against Ukraine, it will have consequences. Kind of weird because, again, Ukraine isn't actually a part of NATO, although, as Ted Galen Carpenter points out, it is treated as a de facto member of NATO, like by the head of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, and the President of the United States, Joe Biden. It's important to remember that Ukraine isn't actually a member state. Now, one important thing that Stoltenberg said is that the Russian military buildup is unprovoked and unexplained and risk miscalculation. Now, look, you could say that Russia is acting like too aggressively or something, like trying to spin it, but to say that it's unprovoked and unexplained is a very concerning statement, because if Stoltenberg really doesn't understand that the U.S. putting warships in the Black Sea is going to provoke some kind of reaction from Russia, then we are in a situation where a miscalculation or a mistake could really happen. So hopefully he's just spouting off mindless propaganda and not thinking about it hard enough. We also have Joe Biden saying that the United States support for is Ukraine's territorial integrity and Ukraine's sovereignty, suggesting that the U.S. would do something if Russia invaded Ukraine. I'm not sure exactly what the U.S. could or would do if Russia would go ahead and invade, which I really don't think Russia is going to do. Kind of like what happened in Georgia in 2000, I want to say 8. It was quite a while ago. I was back in high school. I remember that much. When there's this situation where the U.S. kept telling Georgia, we back you, we back you, we back you. So Georgia overstepped and tried to seize a territory that was in part defended by Russian peacekeepers. And once Russia came in and took, made sure they got all that territory plus a little bit more, there was nothing the U.S. could do about it. And that may be the situation that actually plays out in Ukraine if the U.S. does push Russia to take military action. Probably the most interesting and important thing coming out on the whole situation in Ukraine is we have the Ukrainian president Zelensky alleging a coup plot was thwarted against him and that it was going to be carried out by Russians. Now, when he made his statement on Friday, he was very clear to say that it was Russians, not Russia, which, for people who don't know maybe the distinction or the difference there is that, there are a lot of ethnic Russians in Ukraine. And so if they are trying to carry out a coup, that may or may not be backed by the Russian government. Those are two not necessarily the same things. And, very easy for people, especially in the Western mainstream media, to conflate the two things. And I just want to make sure, very important, to say that there's a very big difference there. But I'm not exactly convinced that this coup was about to happen until the Ukrainian government turns up any kind of evidence or anything like that. I'll remain very skeptical. He says the coup would have taken place, the week we are now in, but I really don't think it's going to happen. Ukraine, by the way, is warning that Russia is going to invade in January of 2022. And, there may just be a little bit of hysteria at play here, along with looking for maybe ways to have political wins. Good, we foiled a coup makes you look like a good, strong, tough leader who's really in charge of his government.